Damien Hayes, 29 years old, a young, talented CEO, head of a powerful family empire. He has it all: money, power, a bright future. But he carries loneliness in his heart, and perhaps even a longing for a lost, warm family affection. And then Isabel appears, his father's new wife, a 34-year-old woman, beautiful, charming, sophisticated, but perhaps also hiding her own feelings in her marriage to an older husband. Under the same luxurious roof, between awkward dinners and furtive glances, a dangerous attraction begins to blossom between Damien and Isabel. Is it sympathy between two lonely souls? Or is it compensation for emotional deprivation? A moment of weakness, a fatal mistake, breaks all moral boundaries, pushing both of them onto the path of sin with no return. But this is only the beginning of the tragedy. How will this dark secret eat away at them? What will happen when the betrayed father and husband discovers the painful truth? Will this mistake really push the young CEO into the abyss, destroying his family, career, and future? A Fateful Kiss with a Stepmother is a haunting story of desire, guilt, and the price of betrayal. Prepare yourself and join me in this tragedy. Damien Hayes, at 29, is already a formidable force in the New York business world. He sits firmly in the CEO chair of the Hayes Group, a real estate and technology empire that his father, Charles Hayes, has painstakingly built and is now gradually transferring power to his only son. Intelligent, ambitious, with a handsome but somewhat distant appearance, Damien throws himself into work as a way to assert himself, to escape his father's huge shadow, and perhaps to fill an invisible void in his soul since his mother passed away many years ago. The relationship between him and Charles has always had the respect of a son for his successful father, but there is also a generation gap, differences in business views, and more importantly, the absence of deep, warm, emotional connections of a real family. Damien's already complicated life becomes even more complicated, had been more turbulent since his father remarried nearly 2 years ago. Isabel Moreau, now Isabel Hayes, had entered their household like a breath of fresh air. 34 years old, she possessed a classic, seductive French beauty, with long blonde hair, deep blue eyes, and a refined, elegant demeanor. She had owned a small art gallery before meeting Charles at a charity dinner. The marriage between a beautiful, educated young woman and a successful, powerful man, nearly 30 years her senior, had inevitably caused a stir in the upper class. Damien's initial reaction to his stepmother was one of politeness, somewhat patronizing. He did not object to his father's marriage, but he could not fully open his heart to the woman. There was an underlying suspicion, a vague unease at her presence in a house once filled with his mother, at the attention she received from his father, who had always been emotionally dry. He kept his distance, exchanging only the necessary small talk at awkward family dinners or events that required them to appear together. However, as time passed and the inevitable interactions under the same roof began to reveal other sides of Isabel, Damien realized that she was more than just pretty. She was intelligent, a remarkable listener, and had a keen understanding of art and literature, areas he also loved but rarely shared with his pragmatic father. Isabel seemed to see the loneliness behind his cold, ambitious exterior, something that other women who had passed through his life had not. "Damien, you seemed unhappy at the party last night," Isabel remarked gently one weekend morning when they were alone in the large dining room of the Hayes mansion. Charles had gone golfing early. Damien was a little surprised by her keen observation. "Just meaningless talk, Isabel. You know, work, money, empty words." Isabel smiled sadly. "I know. Sometimes I feel lost in all that." She looked out the window at the lush green garden. If only there was something more meaningful to talk about. That brief conversation, and many others like it, began to sow the seeds of complex emotions in Damien. He found himself drawn to this unexpected kindred spirit, to the warmth and understanding he unconsciously craved. He began to find excuses to talk to her more, at first just about art, books, but gradually deeper thoughts about work, about life. Isabel seemed to sense the change too. Perhaps she was lonely in her marriage to an older, busy, somewhat patriarchal husband. Perhaps she also found in Damien a kindred spirit, intelligence, and a masculine charm that she lacked. Their eyes met more often, lingering a little longer than usual. A knowing smile, an unexpected gesture of concern. Isabel adjusting Damien's tie before an important event, Damien bringing her a favorite book he'd found by chance. Guilt began to creep into both of their minds. This was his father's wife. This was her husband's son. The bond that was forming between them was wrong, forbidden. They tried to ignore the dangerous vibrations, telling themselves that it was just a normal family affection, a sympathy between two people who felt lonely in a big house. But the seeds of taboo had been sown, and they were quietly germinating, waiting for an opportunity to explode. That opportunity came one wet autumn weekend. Charles Hayes had to go on an unscheduled business trip to Europe that lasted nearly 2 weeks. The vast Hayes mansion suddenly became strangely quiet, with only Damien and Isabel remaining. At first, they tried to maintain their distance, each locking themselves in their own space. Damien buried himself in his work in his study, while Isabel spent time in her reading room or her art gallery. The silence and privacy were supposed to help them control their dangerous emotions, but ironically, it only heightened their awareness of each other's presence, of the emptiness and the potential temptation. On a rainy Saturday evening, a small party of close friends in the art world that Isabel had planned was still taking place at the mansion. Damien, though not very interested, agreed to attend out of politeness and not wanting to be alone in the empty house. The fine wine flowed freely, the music played softly, and the conversations about art and philosophy created an intimate, romantic, yet enchanting atmosphere. Damien found himself observing Isabel more. She was the perfect hostess, gracefully entertaining guests, a smile always on her lips. But in her blue eyes, he saw a hint of sadness, a subtle distance. She had also drunk quite a bit of wine. Her cheeks were rosy, her eyes were dreamier than usual. As the party drew to a close, the guests left one by one, leaving Damien and Isabel alone in the large living room, where the flickering fire in the fireplace cast shadows on the walls hung with precious paintings. The rain continued to fall steadily outside the window. The air became thick with silence and pent-up emotions. "It was a lovely evening," Damien said first, breaking the silence. Isabel turned to look at him, her eyes slightly hazy from the alcohol. "It's lovely, but it's tiring to always have to wear a mask, isn't it, Damien?" She sighed, sitting down on the velvet sofa, the glass of wine in her hand gently swaying. "Sometimes I wonder, does anyone really see the real me?" The question seemed to touch Damien's heart. He was also tired of playing the role of the perfect CEO, the dutiful son. He sat down across from her, looking deeply into the blue eyes that were looking at him. "I see, Isabel. I see a smart, sophisticated woman, but also very lonely." Damien's straightforward words startled Isabel a little. Then she let out a small, sad laugh. "You too, Damien. A talented young man with the world on his shoulders, but no one to really share it with." Their conversation drifted on, becoming deeper and more personal. They spoke of unfulfilled dreams, secret fears, unfulfilled desires. A powerful empathy arose, drawing them closer than ever. The distance between stepmother and stepchild seemed to be erased, leaving only two lonely souls finding understanding in each other. The physical attraction, long suppressed, now flared up fiercely in their eyes, in their rapid breathing. The atmosphere became suffocatingly tense. Desire and guilt mingled. Isabel put her glass down on the table, her hands trembling slightly. Damien stared at her, his heart pounding wildly in his chest. He knew this was wrong, crazy, but he couldn't control it anymore. For a long moment of silence, their eyes locked. Then, as if pulled back by an invisible force, Damien leaned forward. Isabel didn't pull back. Their lips found each other. The kiss began hesitantly, tentatively, then quickly became intense, passionate. It was a release of all the pent-up emotions, a fusion of burning desire and deep despair. They kissed as if it were the only thing that existed in the world, forgetting their status, forgetting their sins, forgetting the terrible consequences that awaited them. It was a fateful kiss, a fatal mistake that could not be undone. But all passions must end. When the kiss ended, they both woke up as if from a nightmare. The harsh reality hit them. What had they done? The truth about their forbidden relationship, about their betrayal of Charles, their father, their husband, was clear to them. Shock, fear, shame, utter guilt. These emotions overwhelmed them. Damien quickly stepped back, his face pale. Isabel put her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror, tears starting to roll down. They didn't dare look each other in the eye. "Isabel, I'm sorry," Damien stuttered, his voice breaking. "No, don't say anything, Damien," Isabel whispered, her voice trembling. "Go. Please go." Damien stood up, staggering like a man who had lost his soul, ran out of the living room, ran to his room and slammed the door. Isabel collapsed on the sofa, sobbing. That night, the luxurious villa became a prison for two guilty souls, tormented by the dark secret that had just been created. That kiss sealed their fates, pushing them down the path to inevitable tragedy. The days after the fateful kiss passed in a heavy, suffocating atmosphere. Damien and Isabel tried to avoid each other at all costs. They moved around the large villa like two ghosts, only briefly meeting in the hallway or during eerily silent meals. False politeness was built, but tension and guilt were evident in every evasive glance, every forced gesture. The dark secret weighed on their minds like a rock. Damien threw himself into his work even more frantically, working day and night as a way to escape the guilt and haunting images of that kiss. But his concentration was waning. He became irritable, easily angered by his staff, made impulsive decisions, and made unnecessary mistakes in his business, something he had never done before. He suffered from insomnia, lost weight, and looked visibly gaunt. Isabel was no better. She became quiet and sad, often locking herself away in her study or her art gallery. Her usual charming smile disappeared, replaced by a worried expression. She tried to act normal when Charles called from Europe, trying to cover up her instability with overly concerned words, but her shaky voice and unnaturalness could not completely fool her perceptive husband. Despite her efforts to avoid it, the dangerous attraction between Damien and Isabel still smoldered. Every time their eyes accidentally met during dinner, or when their hands brushed each other while handing something, the memory of the passionate kiss came flooding back, along with both desire and fear. They were trapped in a toxic emotional spiral, both longing and disgust for themselves and each other. The silence between them was no longer mere distance, but the tension of a secret that could explode at any moment. Charles Hayes, though far away and busy with work, was not completely unaware. Through brief phone calls, he sensed the strangeness in Isabel's voice, the tension in Damien's answers about work. He also heard a few hints from the longtime housekeeper about the strange atmosphere in the house since he was away. A vague suspicion began to grow in the experienced man's heart. He decided to end the business trip a few days earlier than planned. Charles's sudden return only added to Damien and Isabel's panic. They tried to act normal, happy to welcome him back, but the tension and guilt could not be completely hidden. Charles, with his experienced sensitivity and his already existing suspicions, began to pay closer attention. He noticed the furtive glances that Damien and Isabel exchanged, the excessive awkwardness when they were near each other, the avoidance in family conversations. The danger of being exposed was getting closer. One evening, while the family was having dinner, Charles accidentally dropped a napkin. Both Damien and Isabel bent down to help him pick it up, their hands touching under the table. Both quickly pulled their hands back as if they had been burned, their faces red. Charles saw this unusual reaction. His eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Another time, the housekeeper, while cleaning Damien's study, found a sapphire cufflink, a gift she knew Isabel had given Charles on their last wedding anniversary, lying under the table. She said nothing, but her gaze on Damien and Isabel afterward was full of meaning. The pressure of guilt and the fear of discovery began to consume Damien and Isabel from within. They became irritable and suspicious of each other. In a heated argument held in Damien's private room to avoid prying eyes, Isabel blamed Damien for being weak, for starting it all. Damien blamed Isabel for seducing him, for taking advantage of his loneliness. What had started as a false bond now turned into bitterness and resentment. They were destroying each other, and both knew that tragedy was just a step away. The final step to tragedy did not take long. Charles Hayes, with growing suspicion, decided to find out the truth. He may have secretly installed security cameras in the house, or simply the shrewdness of a seasoned man helped him piece together the unusual signs. The truth came out one fateful afternoon. Charles returned home earlier than expected and went straight to Damien's office to discuss an urgent company matter. The door was not closed tightly. As he approached, he heard tense conversation coming from inside. It was Damien and Isabel's voices. "We can't go on like this, Isabel. This guilt is killing me." Damien's voice was filled with despair. "So what do you want me to do?" Isabel's voice was shaky, but also somewhat harsh. "Turn back time, erase that kiss, or confess everything to Charles and ruin us all." Charles stood frozen outside the door, his ears ringing, his heart feeling as if someone was squeezing it. Kiss, confession, ruin. Those words were like knives stabbing straight into his heart. The betrayal he had vaguely sensed was now clearly visible, naked, and 1,000 times more painful. Not only the young wife he loved and trusted, but also the only son he had placed all his hopes on. The two people he loved most had betrayed him together. He pushed the door open and entered. Damien and Isabel jumped back, their faces drained of blood when they saw Charles standing there, his face twisted in pain and anger. "Father," Damien stuttered, unable to speak. "You two," Charles whispered, his voice hoarse, his eyes staring at his wife and son in disbelief. "What have you two done behind my back?" Silence fell. No one dared to answer. That silence was worse than 1,000 confessions. Charles staggered back, one hand clutching his chest, breathing hard. The pain was too great, the betrayal too cruel. It had dealt a fatal blow to the heart of the man who seemed to be made of iron. "Father!" Damien screamed in panic when he saw Charles fall to the floor, his face pale, his breathing ragged. Isabel also rushed over in horror. But it was too late. The sudden, severe heart attack caused by the great mental shock had knocked Charles Hayes down. The ambulance blared its siren and took Charles to the hospital in critical condition. Damien and Isabel sat frozen on the cold waiting bench, not daring to look at each other, completely engulfed in guilt, fear, and belated regret. The fateful kiss, the mistake that seemed to have passed by, had now caused terrible and irreversible consequences. Charles Hayes did not survive. The shock and pain were so great that his heart stopped beating forever. His death was not only the end of a life, but also the beginning of a series of tragedies that befell the rest of them. News of the illicit relationship between Damien and his stepmother quickly leaked out after Charles's death. It was a scandal that shook the New York elite and the entire business community. The reputation of the Hayes family, of the Hayes Corporation, collapsed overnight. The board of directors, under pressure from public opinion and investors, forced Damien to resign as CEO immediately. He lost everything in the blink of an eye: the father he respected, the career he built, his reputation and his future. He became an outcast, living in solitude, tormented and haunted by unwashed guilt. The image of his father falling, his pained eyes before he closed his eyes, would follow him for the rest of his life. Isabel also suffered the same tragic fate. Expelled from the Hayes family, losing her financial support and reputation, despised by society, she lived in isolation and tormented by her conscience. The wrong, fleeting feelings for Damien now turned into horror, an obsession with the death of the husband she had betrayed. Gone was the charm and sophistication of the past. Only a broken woman remained, facing the consequences of her own actions alone. Love, desire, empathy. Whatever had existed between Damien and Isabel was completely destroyed by the tragedy it created. They became two strangers, separated by unforgivable guilt and never-ending pain. The story ends in desolation and gloom. There is no salvation, no chance to start over. There is only a painful lesson about the price to pay for crossing moral boundaries, for betraying trust, and for a fateful kiss that plunged everyone into a spiral of tragedy with no way out. That fatal mistake forever changed their fates, leaving behind loss, pain, and late regret that lasts forever. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you like this content, don't forget to click like, share this story with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more meaningful stories.